Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie and today we'll be talking about equipment and ingredients that are essential for alcohol making at home. Just to let you know, making alcohol is like baking a cake. I call it liquid baking because you're gonna need water, yeast, and sugar. So we're gonna talk about the ingredients later. First, we can talk about the equipment. So you won't need an oven. Instead, you're gonna need to use a pan. So you'll need a stove, or if you wanna take it easy and do your alcohol sitting down, you could take a portable stove that we have over here. You're also gonna need a pan. I have this big pan over here, stainless steel. And to make it easier, I have a pan that has a little measuring scale inside. So if I need 3 liters of water, I know exactly up to where to pour the water. If you're one of those people who can't find their covers anymore, do not fret. You will not need a cover for the pan. You could just use the open pan. This is where you're gonna mix the ingredients before it turns into alcohol. In order to mix it, since we're dealing with yeast is a fungus, it's best to use a mixture that has no pores, because if it has pores, the bacteria can seep in the pores, and we want to make your wash as clean as possible. Therefore, I suggest using a silver spoon, not a wood one. Silicone, you can always use silicone, but my preference is metallic. And I took one that's a little bit shallow, therefore I can scoop the liquid from the pan into the jar. So what is the jar? The jar is this bad boy right here. So it's 1 gallon. Some people prefer to ferment 5 gallons at a time. So depending on your preference, I choose 1 gallon because if ever I mess up, it's a smaller batch to throw away. And very important, you need to get this jar with an airlock. So what does an airlock look like? This right here is an airlock. How it works is that you're supposed to put it on top of the fermenting jar. So you put this in here, fill it up with water. And once there's water in, you're gonna see bubbling in the future. So you need to put water in to know if your alcohol is getting processed. If there's no water, there's no idea to know if what you're doing is working or not. So once you put water in, there's the top part with a little bit of holes. So the CO2 comes out. So the CO2 is a reaction of the sugar, yeast, and water. So once those 3 ingredients are paired together, there's a little CO2 that comes out, just like bread. That's why bread rises in the oven. It's because when you put in the yeast, the CO2 is trying to escape and the bread rises. So it's the same thing with alcohol, and you're gonna need this so your jar does not explode. So on top of your jar, you're gonna have this little cover here and a hole. And it's important, so flies don't get inside your mix, to put this little gummy thingy in the hole, and you put your airlock on top of it. So once the airlock is on top of it, everything is sealed tightly and no oxygen comes in, because if too much oxygen comes into your liquid, the alcohol might become vinegar and the flies might come in. The jar is super important. That's where the fermentation happens, and that's what transforms the liquid of sugar, water, and yeast into alcohol. We also want to know what percentage of alcohol we're making. So depending on the yeast that you use, you can make up to 20% alcohol. This is with fermentation alone. And in order to measure this, you're going to need a hydrometer and cylinder. So someone dropped my hydrometer yesterday and it broke, so I had to order a new one. It arrived after 24 hours, so it's pretty quick. This is a 3-scale hydrometer right here. And you're gonna need this to calculate the percentage of alcohol that you're making with the help of this cylinder. So this goes inside here. Once you have your sugar and water, so before pitching in the yeast, you can put a bunch here all the way up to, let's say, 180 milliliters, not to the top, because you need space for when you drop the hydrometer in. This is gonna bring the liquid up and you don't want it to spill. So if you put it to 180 and you put the hydrometer in, the liquid goes all the way up to 200 milliliters. And based on the hydrometer, you'll be able to calculate the starting gravity of your wash. Starting gravity is how heavy your liquid is based on the amount of sugar that you've added to the water. So that's the beginning steps. And you might also want to have a suction pump or a siphon. This is to take the alcohol from the pan and put it into the jar. You can always pour it However, at the end, this is more essential because at the end, you're gonna have all the yeast sink to the bottom of your fermenting jar, and you do not want to take that yeast into your alcohol because it affects the taste and there's a texture to it. So you wanna just remove all the sediments and keep the liquids alone. And you're gonna need this to suction all the top part, so the liquid part, and leave one layer of the residue of the yeast at the bottom. This is when the fermentation is done after 2 to 4 weeks, roughly. You can always leave it more than 4 weeks, depending on your preferences. The longer you leave it, the clearer your alcohol tends to be. And usually the more sugar you add in general, the longer it's gonna take for your fermentation to finish. So how do you know when your fermentation is done? This is when you bring in the hydrometer. So your hydrometer at the end, so after the 2 to 4 weeks, has to be at 0.990 to 1.000. So it should be in this range. So at the beginning, when you drop the hydrometer in the cylinder, it should float high around here. And at the end, it should float low around here. If at the beginning and the end you see that the hydrometer, when you put it in the cylinder, it has not moved, that means that your fermentation is stuck and there might be a problem with the environment. So it's either too cold, either there's too much sugar, there's not enough water. So there are various factors. And there's always a way of troubleshooting it. So do not fret if your fermentation is stuck. There is a solution. Now, in terms of ingredients, so baking ingredients, we need some sort of yeast. So I use here daddy yeast. You can use baker's yeast if you're a baker and you just have packs of bread yeast hanging around. I've used that for one of my previous batches. You can also get EC 1118. There's turbo yeast if you want to make a fermentation quickly or if you want to make alcohol quickly, but that tends to have different flavors, off flavors as they call it, meaning a little bit more bitter. So you might not necessarily like turbo yeast. Therefore, I would suggest if you have bread yeast or daddy yeast to start with those. And to help the yeast, invigorate and give it a little push, I have yeast nutrients right here. So that helps accelerate the fermentation process at the beginning. And it just helps activate the yeast a little bit, a little boost of Gatorade. So another ingredient you're gonna need is water. Tap water is fine. And sugar. So you can use white sugar, you can use yellow sugar or brown sugar, and you can use other sources of sugar like fruits. You can chop fruits, depending on the different types of alcohol. If you wanna make wine, you can chop fruits. If you wanna make mead, you can add honey. If you want to make rum, you can add molasses. But rum, you're gonna need to do some distillation at the end. So distillation is a process that transforms the 20% alcohol to 40%, but you're gonna need a still, and the still is illegal in a lot of places of the world. So if you like the taste, you can always just add molasses and not distill it. So me personally, I do not distill because it's illegal where I live, and I'm pretty satisfied with the taste. You can also add juice, like grape juice. You can add grains. There's this sort of sugar in the grains that's to make beer. So the possibilities are endless as long as there's a source of sugar. The sugar and the yeast together will react to make alcohol. So let me know in the comments below if you use other sources of sugar for your alcohol. I'd like to know, what do people use out there? I'm always ready to try new things. Everything that I showed today will be in the links in the description below, so you can purchase them and you can start making your first, second, third, or millionth batch. It's never too late to start. And these are the pretty basic ingredients, so you do not need more than this. So if you found this video valuable, share it with a friend. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.